I stood in the doorway, with my shoes still on. My coat half-buttoned, my wife had already turned her back. 17 years elapsed into the quiet space between the sofa and the wall. I felt smaller than the room, smaller than the life we built. She told me to leave without raising her voice. That calm hurt more than shouting ever could. I walked to the garage because it felt safer than the street. The door closed behind me, and the sound landed heavy. My hands shook as I opened the trunk. I did not know what to take, so I took nothing. The cold came up through the concrete. I remember thinking how clean everything looked for a moment, like the house was already forgetting me. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. My phone buzzed once, then stopped. I did not check it. I watched the house lights through the windshield. One by one, they went off. It felt deliberate. Like punctuation in a sentence, I was no longer allowed to finish. I kept my breathing slow because panic would not help. I drove without direction and parked near the old hardware store. The place where we once argued about paint colors, memory has a way of showing up uninvited. I sat there counting minutes. I wondered who she had called. Not with anger, but with a dull acceptance that something had moved beyond us while I was still inside it. 3 hours passed without shape. Then the phone rang, a number I did not know. I let it ring until it stopped. A second call followed. My chest tightened. I finally answered and listened. The voice was calm and professional. It said my name and said there was a matter of residence to address. I did not argue or explain. I drove back slowly. The street looked unchanged, which felt wrong. A sheriff stood at my front door. His presence was polite and final. My wife did not come out. The law spoke where marriage no longer did. And I understood then that this was planned long before tonight. The sheriff spoke softly, like he was trying not to wake the neighbors. He held a folded paper, and my name was printed on it. I noticed the ink before the words. My wife stayed invisible behind the door. I nodded without being asked. Something in me decided to stay calm, because panic would only belong to her now. He explained the order in simple language: temporary residence removal. Personal items only. No raised voices, no scene. I listened as if this was happening to someone else. The house behind him felt sealed, like air could no longer move through it. I wondered how long that paper had existed before tonight. I stepped inside with him standing just behind me. The house smelled the same, which felt cruel. My keys no longer mattered. Every step echoed louder than it should have. I saw photos still on the wall and understood she had not taken them down yet because she wanted them to watch me leave. I took a small bag from the closet, clothes chosen without thought. I avoided the bedroom because that space felt guarded. My hands moved on habit alone, 17 years reduced to weight and fabric. I noticed she had already removed one drawer, the one with old letters. The sheriff waited near the door, respectful but firm. He did not rush me yet, time pressed anyway. I asked nothing. He said nothing more. The silence felt official. Outside a car passed, and life continued without permission for me. As I left, I looked once toward the living room. The couch still held the shape of where she had sat earlier. That mark felt louder than words. I realized she had chosen timing carefully. Late enough to weaken me, early enough to look reasonable. The door closed and locked from the inside. I heard it clearly. The sound carried finality without cruelty. The sheriff nodded and walked away. I stood there longer than needed because endings deserve a moment even when no one is watching. I drove until the streets changed names and the houses grew closer together. I needed distance more than direction. The night felt thick and unmoving. My body stayed alert while my thoughts slowed down. Shock has a way of doing that, keeping you upright while everything else falls behind. I parked near a small motel with flickering lights, the kind of place that survives by being unnoticed. I sat in the car longer than needed, my hands resting on the wheel. I realized I had not eaten since morning. Hunger felt irrelevant compared to the quiet weight pressing my chest. Inside the room, the air smelled of detergent and old carpet. The bedspread was stiff and clean. I placed my bag on the chair and stood there listening. No familiar sounds, no shared walls, no history. Just the hum of a machine somewhere behind the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the day finally arrive in my body. My shoulders dropped without permission. I thought about the order in the sheriff's hand, about how carefully it must have been prepared. Trust does not break loudly. It leaves quietly with paperwork. I opened my phone and saw the missed calls clearly now, one from an old coworker, one from my sister. No message from her. That absence spoke with precision. I chose not to respond yet. Explanation requires energy, and I was conserving what little I had left. Sleep did not come easily. My eyes closed, but my mind stayed awake, replaying moments I had dismissed as harmless. Small silences, small delays, small changes in routine. Nothing dramatic enough to confront, enough to build something solid without me noticing. Near morning, I understood something important. This removal was not the event, it was the confirmation. Whatever decision had been made did not begin tonight. Tonight was simply when I was informed. That realization settled heavy but clear. Morning came without comfort. The light through the curtains felt clinical, like it was checking on me rather than greeting me. I washed my face in the small sink and watched a stranger look back. Calm on the surface, thinner around the eyes. I dressed slowly because there was nowhere to rush to anymore. I drove to a diner that smelled like coffee and habit. The waitress did not ask questions, and I appreciated that. I ate eggs without tasting them and listened to the low murmur of other lives continuing. Normalcy has weight when you are no longer part of it. I checked my bank account while sitting there. Balances looked familiar, which was unsettling. Nothing had moved yet. That told me something. Careful people do not rush, they prepare. I paid cash and left a tip larger than usual because control shows up in small choices. The first call I made was not to a lawyer, it was to an old friend who knew me before the marriage. He answered slowly, like he was already awake and waiting. I told him only what mattered. I was out of the house and needed a place to think. He did not ask for details, and that was a gift. He said, "Come by later and bring nothing heavy." After the call, I felt a small shift inside. Not hope exactly. More like alignment. Pieces moving back into positions they once held. I spent the afternoon driving past places tied to shared decisions. The gym we joined and stopped using, the park where we talked about retirement. Memory lined the streets like markers I had ignored. Each one now visible and precise. By evening, I understood something else. Being removed does not mean being erased. It means the board has been cleared for a different game, one that requires patience and attention. I was still breathing steadily, and that meant I had time. I arrived at my friend's house just before dark. He opened the door and stepped aside without comment. Familiarity settled my nerves, not comfort, but grounding. We sat at the table with 2 beers unopened. Neither of us reached for them. Time felt more useful than distraction. He listened while I spoke in a straight line. No emotion added, just sequence and fact, the order, the timing, the silence. Saying it out loud removed some of its weight. It turned chaos into structure. He nodded once when I finished and said, "She planned this." That night I slept on his couch and rested deeper than I had in weeks. The body knows when it is not being watched. I woke before sunrise with clarity instead of dread. Clarity does not feel warm, but it holds you upright. I made coffee and looked through my phone again. No new messages from her. That silence was intentional. She believed absence would weaken me. What she forgot was that I had lived most of my life before her without being managed. I opened a folder I had not touched in years. Old emails saved without intention, financial records I kept out of habit, agreements made casually over time, not evidence then, but context now. Patterns begin to show themselves when you stop trusting explanations. By midday, I understood something important. She expected collapse or anger. Either would justify her version of events, restraint removes that leverage. Calm forces the other side to reveal more than they planned. That afternoon, I scheduled my first legal consultation, not in secret, but with intention. Preparation is not revenge. It is dignity in motion. Whatever she believed about my limits would soon be tested quietly and thoroughly. The office was quiet in a way that felt intentional. Clean walls, simple chairs, no distractions. The attorney shook my hand and waited. I noticed how waiting has power when used correctly. I sat and placed my folder on the desk without explaining it yet. I spoke carefully and slowly, not because I was unsure, but because precision mattered. Dates, amounts, patterns of behavior, nothing dramatic, nothing embellished. Just a line of events that made sense when aligned. The attorney listened without interruption, and that told me I was being taken seriously. When I finished, he opened the folder himself. His eyes moved faster now, recognition settling in. He did not smile or frown. Professionals rarely do. He said a few words that changed the weight in the room. You were removed quickly, and that creates exposure. He explained options without urgency. Timelines instead of threats. Rights instead of revenge. I realized how much strength lives in procedure. When emotions are stripped away, facts remain sharp. I asked only one question then, and it was the right one. He told me to do nothing publicly. No messages, no reactions, no attempts to retrieve what was not permitted. Restraint would speak louder than resistance. Silence creates space, and space invites mistakes from the other side. On the drive back, I felt steadier than I had in days. Not hopeful, not angry, just aligned. When you know where you stand, the ground stops shifting under you. I understood then that this process would reward patience more than force. That evening my phone finally lit up with her name. No message, just a missed call. I did not return it. Timing matters, and mine was no longer tied to hers. The missed call stayed unanswered through the night, not as a tactic, but as a boundary. I slept without interruption and woke with the sense that something subtle had shifted. Silence was no longer empty. It was doing work on my behalf. I spent the morning organizing records with no rush. Bank statements, timelines, property notes. I did not search for damage yet. I was mapping terrain, preparation changes, posture. I noticed my hands were steady as I sorted pages into clean stacks. Another call came late morning. Again, no message. I imagined her expectation that I would panic or plead. Neither urge arrived. Absence creates a vacuum, and people often fill it with their worst assumptions. By afternoon, an email followed, short and polite on the surface, asking if we could talk like adults. I read it once and closed it. Language matters, and that phrase carried history. Adults do not remove each other through paperwork without conversation. I forwarded the message to my attorney and waited. The waiting felt different now, no longer passive but deliberate. Time had stopped being something she controlled. That evening, my friend asked if I was angry yet. I told him not yet, and maybe not ever. Anger narrows vision. Clarity widens it. He nodded like he understood something important, without needing it explained. Before sleep, I realized what silence had begun to reveal. Her urgency was growing while mine was settling. Imbalance creates mistakes, and mistakes leave trails. I turned off the light knowing tomorrow would bring more information simply by doing nothing. The attorney called mid-morning and asked me to come in again. His tone was unchanged, which I had learned to respect. Urgency often hides weakness. I arrived with the same folder and a second one thinner, but heavier in meaning. He laid documents across the desk in a clean order. Bank transfers, account adjustments, timing that did not align with shared goals. Nothing illegal on its own. Together they told a story of preparation. I felt no surge of anger, only recognition. He explained how patterns matter more than moments, how intent can be inferred without accusation. I listened closely because this was not about winning loudly. It was about standing correctly when the room finally went quiet. One account stood out, opened months before with small regular deposits. Careful amounts meant to avoid notice. I remembered conversations about simplifying finances, about trust. The memory landed flat without pain. Clarity removes drama, he advised patience again. Not because time favored her, but because it revealed more. People who believe they are ahead tend to move faster than they should. Speed creates errors. I nodded and felt grounded in that logic. On the drive back, I passed our old park and did not look over. Some places no longer deserved my attention. Forward motion is not dramatic. It is simply consistent. That night, another message arrived longer, this time explaining intentions, framing the removal as protection and necessity. I did not reply. The trail was growing exactly as expected. Silence continued to work while I rested. The next morning arrived with a message waiting, longer than the others and less careful. I could feel the strain through the screen. Control weakens before it breaks. I read it slowly and noticed the shift from explanation to justification. She wrote about fairness and contribution, about how things had changed. Language softened where certainty once lived. When people stop stating facts and start narrating feelings, it means the ground beneath them is moving. I forwarded the message again without comment. Restraint had become routine now, not effort, but habit. Silence had reshaped the rhythm of my days. I no longer waited for her actions. I noted them and moved on. The attorney called later and asked if I had noticed the change. I said yes without elaboration. He told me that escalation often precedes disclosure. People reveal more when they believe they are losing narrative control. That afternoon, I received a document request from her counsel. Limited and selective, it confirmed what we suspected. They were reacting, not leading. I provided exactly what was required and nothing more. Precision matters when momentum shifts. I took a walk before sunset and felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, but balance. Power does not announce itself when it returns. It settles quietly like weight redistributing. That night, my friend noticed the difference without being told. He said, "You look steadier." I nodded, because it was true. When you stop chasing explanations, your energy returns to you. Before sleep, I reviewed the timeline one more time. Not for reassurance, but for accuracy. Every step had been measured and documented. Whatever came next would land on prepared ground, not on me. The call came late afternoon, and I answered because timing felt right. Her voice sounded practiced at first, then uneven. She spoke faster than usual, filling space I no longer occupied. I listened without interruption and heard something new underneath the words. She said the process was becoming harder than expected, that misunderstandings were growing, language drifted toward blame without naming it. I let the silence stretch between her sentences. Silence invites honesty or exposes fear. She mentioned finances without details, said things were complicated. I asked one question only and kept my voice level. "Which account are you referring to?" The pause that followed was long enough to speak for her. She corrected herself quickly, offered another explanation, then another. Clarity dissolved into noise. When people improvise truth, it shows in rhythm, not content. I did not argue. I thanked her for calling and ended it politely. Minutes later, an email arrived, attempting to restate the conversation. Timelines shifted, amounts blurred. It was an effort to regain footing. I forwarded it without comment and returned to what I was doing. The attorney called in the evening and said that was significant. Unsolicited correction often signals concern. Concern accelerates disclosure. He told me to remain consistent and let the process continue to unfold. That night, I slept deeply. Not from exhaustion, but from alignment. The body rests when it is no longer bracing. I woke once briefly and realized I no longer felt displaced. Wherever I stood was temporary by choice. In the morning, I reviewed the notes and saw the arc clearly. Removal had been the opening move, not the strategy. Strategies require follow-through, and hers was unraveling quietly in real time. The attorney asked me to come in one more time before the end of the week. Not urgent, but deliberate, his voice carried a tone I had not heard before. Confirmation without celebration, I arrived and noticed how familiar the room felt now. Familiarity changes posture. He showed me a revised filing from her side. Expanded disclosures, added explanations, preemptive in nature. It read like someone trying to get ahead of questions they knew were coming. Timing matters, and this timing spoke clearly. He pointed to inconsistencies, gently. Dates that shifted, numbers that rounded conveniently. None of it dramatic enough to alarm a stranger, enough to matter in a formal setting. Pressure reveals detail, and detail carries weight. For the first time, he spoke about leverage, not as a threat, but as a condition. Leverage exists when one side needs resolution faster than the other. He said, "Right now, that side is not you." The sentence settled in my chest without heat. We discussed next steps briefly. Nothing aggressive, nothing rushed. Consistency was the instruction. Silence when appropriate, response when required. I left with no sense of victory, only alignment. That was enough. That afternoon, another message came from her, shorter again, careful again. The swing between tones told its own story. I did not open it immediately. Control is sometimes demonstrated by timing alone. I took a long walk and noticed details I had missed for weeks. Trees, traffic, distant conversations, presence returns when mental noise fades. I felt no urge to rehearse explanations or outcomes. That evening, I finally read the message. It asked for cooperation and understanding. Words chosen to soften ground that had hardened. I closed it without reply and understood something final. Removal had cost her more than it cost me. The meeting was brief and procedural, held in a room that did not belong to either of us. Neutral walls, neutral chairs, neutral tone. I noticed she avoided my eyes and focused on her papers. Control had narrowed her vision. Mine felt wider than it had in years. Terms were read aloud slowly. Revisions accepted without debate. Concessions framed as mutual decisions. I spoke only when required and did not elaborate. Restraint had become my language. Every word placed with intention and weight. At one point, she tried to explain herself, not legally, but personally. The mediator redirected gently. The moment passed. Explanations lose value when outcomes are already decided. I felt no urge to respond. When it ended, we stood at the same time. No acknowledgement exchanged. She left first. Urgency still clinging to her movements, I gathered my folders slowly and felt the weight was gone. Paper had done its work. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, but cleaner. I realized I was no longer reacting to anything. The sequence had completed itself without drama. Quiet endings rarely announce their arrival. I drove past the old house once without stopping. Lights were on, but it no longer registered as mine. Memory loosened its grip when ownership ended. Closure does not arrive as emotion. It arrives as absence. That night, I slept in my own place for the first time. Modest and temporary, but chosen. I unpacked slowly, knowing nothing inside would be taken from me again without consent. 17 years ended with a knock and concluded with silence. Not the silence of loss, but of completion. Some doors close loudly, others simply stay shut. This one did not need reopening.